early Roman kings in their sharkskin suits, bow ties and buttons, high top boots, driving the spikes in, blazing the rails, nailed in their coffins, top hats and tails. Fly away, little bird, fly away, flap your wings, fly by night like the early Roman king.
Welcome to Songs of Experience, a Bob Dylan podcast where we explore the man and the music one song at a time. I'm your host, Henry Bernstein, and I'm very happy to welcome a familiar face to me from every Rough and Rowdy Ways show I've been to. You may have seen him in the front row, the man in the long black coat, Peter Hayward, here to talk about early Roman kings from Dylan's 2012 album, Tempest. Hi, Peter.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, I mean, we officially, I think, met in Milwaukee in 2023, maybe Chicago. Can't remember. It's one of those.
Yeah, it's one of those last year, and I know by the end of the 2023 tour, we had met a couple times.
Yeah,
the last three shows. So.
I have a memory of you outside of the Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, meeting you there, but maybe I'm conflating a bunch of different things. Maybe it was Chicago at a bar. I don't know.
That could be, but also, things get lost post-show, especially.
Yeah.
Meeting people, because that might have been my first time meeting you, and I could be a recognizable figure too, I'm sure.
Yes, you are. As I said, the man in the long black coat, the hat. You are a recognizable Bob Dylan show person. So on that note, Peter, what is your Bob Dylan origin story?
Well, yeah, so I'm a musician, and he's had a huge influence on me, for a long time, and so I don't know, in a way, like his music really came to me in a roundabout way that was like almost destined to happen, really. My dad's side of the family are mostly painters, but we come from a somewhat musical family, so it was always encouraged. All my siblings took lessons. So me and my brother are still musicians. My sister's a dancer. And so my brother latched on to it kind of right away, and younger brother, I followed in his footsteps, and so taught me my first couple chords on piano. Also, shout out to Chris Kramer in Chicago. I guess from a young age, I really liked older music, like jazz and blues. Like as a kid, I was a big fan of Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. And I can remember my grandpa, David, he had the whole place wired with speakers, and he was always just playing old jazz and old stuff. And so, I think that's probably where I first heard it. And, that like swing of the eighth notes on the, hi-hat. My music tastes weren't the same as the average 10 or 11-year-old, I was,
so you came to Bob pretty early on as a child.
Yeah, well, I was like into that old stuff from an early age, and so I was like into the White Stripes too, because my brother showed me them. I was like, oh, they have this old sound, this kind of bluesy sound that I naturally just liked. As a kid, I was always a fan of I don't know, I probably got it from my grandpa, but I was always a fan of old music, kind of like old dudes playing music too, and so I kind of liked their old sound. They were making that stuff new again, which I thought was really cool. And so I knew One More Cup of Coffee was a cover, and we went on a bunch of road trips as kids, and so Knockin' on Heaven's Door was on one of my dad's burned CD playlists. And so I knew that song, but I didn't know it was Bob. And so eventually, when I got curious about Bob, I asked him, he was like, oh yeah, you know that song, that's Bob. I was like, what, really? I remember being like, this song should go on for 20 minutes.
Right,
I thought, and it's 2 minutes. And just
right, it's two verses, basically.
Right. So yeah, it was about the time I kind of started getting into music and playing on my own. I think I was talking to my grandparents, and my grandpa was like, yeah, you should, I don't think I've played any, but you should check out Bob Dylan, and he has, some old CDs and stuff. The real story of how I got into Dylan goes back in time, because
even before that?
Yeah, well, because like I said, it was destined to happen. And so, I'm from Minnesota, and so my family's from Minnesota too, so there's some Dylan connection. So basically how it happened was my grandparents, it was 1960 probably, I assume. given the dates. My grandpa was working downtown, I think, at what is now the IDS Center, and my grandma was going to the U of M doing kind of classes during the day while their kids were at school, my mom. And so they would meet at the Purple Onion in Dinkytown. And so my grandma, as she tells it to me, she says, I never got his name, but we went in there so many times, and there was always this kid hanging around, and I just remembered his voice. And, years later, I see on the TV, oh, yeah, Bob Dylan, here, and then, she hears him sing, and she goes, hey, that's him, to my grandpa. She's like, yeah, that's that guy we saw in the, cafe there.
Oh, my God.
And so I know that the Purple Onion tapes from the show he played there came out a couple of years ago, but from what I've researched and from what my, grandma said, it was probably just one of the times he was hanging around, during the day, and they just happened to get lunch. So
not going to class or to his fraternity.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I love Minnesota stories like that. I feel like anytime you meet a Bob Dylan fan who's from the Twin Cities, they have like at least only at most 3 degrees of separation from Bob Dylan. That's incredible. Oh my God. Are your grandparents the same age as Bob?
Yeah, slightly older, just a couple years older, basically.
Okay.
So
that year he was like a freshman at U of M. They were older students.
Yeah, I think my grandma is 87 now. So, quite a bit older. She waited to take classes until, they had kids and whatnot. But so not quite that same, they were on the tail end of the other generation, it feels like to me. Yeah, so, just that happenstance of crossing paths. And so, they were always, Dylan fans,
That's
and
incredible.
And, I love the fact that she just remembered his voice, and she was like, I loved that voice, it was so distinct. And, that's one of my favorite things about Bob, he's my favorite singer. And so, after that, I just, I really dug into Dylan, and we have a bunch of old records, from the 60s and 70s. My uncle passed away in 76. And so I think the last record he got was Desire, probably, of Dylan's, and I that was the first one I listened to because I was looking through. I was like, that's a cool hat. I'm going to listen to that one, So I listened to that.
It is a cool hat.
It's a really cool hat, yeah. So, I listened to that, and then I just, I jumped around a bit. I'm into the blues stuff, so the modern stuff just, fit with what I liked naturally. And then I dug into the old stuff too, and especially, going, through my later teen years, early 20s, that 60s stuff really resonated with me, and I still love it. But like, for me, I've always loved that older stuff. And as I was starting to play music more, I got into jazz, like playing jazz more. And then, Shadows in the Night came out, which is all standards. I was like, well, I'm doing a lot of this stuff and doing it in school too, so it all kind of just fit with me really well. I don't know. It just made sense for the style I'm into.
That's perfect. Well, that would make sense based on what you said about why this song. We'll get to that in a second. Peter, this is, I guess, I don't know what to call it, auspicious or what, but 9 episodes in, I'm already repeating an album. We started with Tempest, of course, and here we are with Early Roman King. So some of these stats may be familiar to folks listening, but this song was released as a single in August 7th, 2012, recorded between January and March of 2012 at Groove Masters, produced by Bob Dylan, of course, with Bob Dylan on guitar, piano, vocals, Tony Garnier on bass, Donnie Heron on steel guitar, banjo, violin, mandolin, Stu Kimball guitar, George Rosselli drums, Charlie Sexton guitar. So the main touring band with David Hidalgo on guitar, accordion, violin. Bob kind of kept that accordion sound from Together Through Life and brought David Hidalgo back. Other than that, he doesn't have like a lot of musicians on here. It's really just the touring band. So my question, Peter, is why this song? Why Early Roman Kings?
There's a number of things, I guess. Tempest was my first new original Bob album. I probably got into him, 2007, 2008, something like that, when I was, 12 or 13, something like that. I guess technically Christmas in the Heart would be the first one. The first new one I actually
That's quite
listened to.
an interesting first new Bob Dylan
And
album.
I actually didn't actually probably listen to that until I listened to Tempest. I just
Mhm.
heard he had a Christmas album out. It was my first new album. I guess, I don't know, the song always really stuck out to me. I didn't realize it was the live debut of it, but I did see the live debut of it at the XL Energy
At the
Center.
XL Energy Center. Wow, I was
Yeah,
gonna mention that later. Wow, that's
yeah.
great.
I was so far in the back, and that venue just stinks
Yeah, I
for
saw.
any kind of music.
I was at the one that the Foo Fighters opened on that tour. I was at that one at XL Energy Center. Yeah, the minor league hockey arenas not great venues for Bob.
Yeah, no, I mean any arena, even like the Wintrust, that 2017
Yes,
show,
yes.
the sound was terrible in there, and it's just like summer days sounded like a rocket ship was taking off, which it
Yeah.
was why I love why he plays the smaller things now.
The
It's
crowd
just
was really rough too at that show too. They were very chatty, very upset that he wasn't quote playing the hits, and even though
well,
he was.
and that's how it goes when the sound's not good.
Right.
And it's a big place, there's no way you can even see anybody on stage unless you have binoculars if you're in the
Hmm.
back. It's just like that's just a rough show for anybody.
But you heard the first early Roman gigs anyway.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I really just love this song.
Mhm.
And I've actually I visit my brother in Chicago a lot, and for some reason I always put on Tempest at a certain point driving to Chicago, and early Roman Kings, it's got that bluesy, Muddy
Mhm.
Waters feel to it. So I love driving to Chicago with that song playing. It just feels good.
So you just like it.
I just like it, and it's. I also feel that it's got a bit of a bad rap with some
Mhm.
Dylan fans. Like, I think it's because it's been played so much, and people are like, "Oh, another blues" or whatever. But it's not just a repetitive blues.
Let's talk about that for a second before we get into the lyrics. So, this
Yes.
song has been performed an insane 545 times. First, as you said, on November 7th in 2012 in St. Paul, Minnesota, and as recently as the Outlaw Tour this summer in September 17th of this past year, in 2024. So, with apologies to Ray Paget, who, don't worry, he's not going to listen to this episode anyway, because, I was very interested when he wanted to cover it because for many people like Ray, I think it is kind of a bathroom break in the set list, or like you said, they're kind of tired of it because they've heard it so much. But I have this very vivid memory. I remember in 2019, actually, I don't know if you were at the either Milwaukee or Chicago shows in 2019,
Yeah.
but so do you remember in Milwaukee, this song actually got the crowd up and everyone was like dancing and, waving their hands and bopping and grooving. I mean, this one kind of brought down the house. And certainly at Outlaw Tour, I think because a lot of the folks there didn't recognize most of the songs, people were just happy to hear a Muddy Waters-esque blues song. So I think you're right. It does
Right.
get a bad rap. Was that your
It.
memory of it also in 2019?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, and I think that when you talk to like Bob fans who know it's played a bunch, then they're like, oh, I don't want to hear that. But if you talk to anybody else, they're gonna be like, I love this song. Like, this is
Mm.
great. Like, this is a good blues. And like my wife, like I told her, I was like, yeah, I'm doing early Roman Kings. I love this song. I was like, yeah, kind of, among Bob fans because it's played so much, they're over. And she's like, what? Why? It's a great song. And I think, yeah, it's a blues, but it's not just a Muddy Waters blues. And I'll talk about that in a second. But it's also like, I think way above some of his other blueses, like from modern times, like
Mm.
Rollin' and Tumblin', and When the Levee's Gonna Break. Those are rewrites of blues
Roland
songs.
Dublin's barely a rewrite.
Exactly. Well, which is
Yeah.
which is fine with me,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like
Doesn't
I
bother me
do.
either. Yeah.
I love that song. I also love its place on the album, and it's great. But I think those kind of maybe led to this
Hmm.
in a way because it is, I think, so different from at least the recorded version from those, like with his take on the blues, that it's really worthy of something. I mean, it's got great lyrics too, which we can talk about.
Well, let's get
But
into the lyrics a little bit because I want to come back to since you're a musician, this is like a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
opportunity. I want to get into kind of the nerdy music stuff with him, but with you. But you did mention to me offline you wanted to cover all the lyrics, so I don't know if we'll get to all of them. But let's just start at the beginning. What jumps out at you in terms of this painting a picture of this visual image of what somebody looks like, what they're wearing in that first stanza?
Well, so for this, to me, the early Roman kings in most of this, they feel like the early American empire builders. I really think that he's using the song with these Roman kings as this character, kind of superimposed on top about his critique of America in a
Mm.
way. Because they're interesting looking Roman kings, right? They don't look like Roman kings.
Sharkskin suits, bow ties and buttons, high top boots.
Right. They're mobster looking, some
Mobsters,
kind
right.
of gang. Right.
In many
Exactly.
ways, he could be describing Romans just centuries and centuries later, right? Yeah.
Right, right. And he's got this great in the Tempest interviews, he talks about, how the past and the present kind of blend together and there's no really like point where you can narrow down one thing. He even goes, and he goes, deeper in that interview about some other things, but this big sense of, don't be restricted to one time because everything happens at once and kind of repeats itself and there's blending between things. So yeah, I really think that this is two layers on top of it. It's the early Roman kings plus these gangsters kind of layered on top of the robber barons or the
Mhm.
railroad builders of the late 1800s.
And then he does that thing where he takes something that seems completely not to fit at all. He's sort of got like this harsh, like you said, mobster-esque image, and then all of a sudden, fly away, little bird, fly away and flap your wings. Who is Bob talking to when Bob says, "Fly away, little bird"?
That line comes from, I think, The Fugitive Kind,
Mm,
the movie, and in that movie, he's talking to it's basically a retelling of Orpheus Descending, the Tennessee Williams play. The main character, Marlon Brando, is talking to this woman who's trapped, working at this convenience store for his for her horrible husband who's sick and dying and racist, and he's telling her to get out of there basically. And so I think he's telling people trapped in the cycle of whatever these early Roman kings cause
mm,
to fly away out
mm.
of there. But there's also some interesting things in there too, with the birds. I'll Fly Away has been in so many blues songs,
Of
if
course.
Alan Lomax and that kind of stuff, there's it's all in those old things.
Yeah, and
But
those old
also
timey songs like
right,
"I'll
right.
Fly Away," yeah,
Yeah,
from like the old Brother soundtrack, and yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And he could probably love that movie, I'm sure, who doesn't?
yeah.
Could have had that in mind too. But then also in a Roman context, there is this idea of augury with the Roman kings were like chieftains to God, basically had a connection to God, and
Mm,
bird divination was actually really common, and they were kind of in charge of that supreme bird divination, and which happened in Romulus and Remus too.
mm.
The first when they were opposing each other, I forgot the exact details, but they summoned birds and kind of talked to birds to try to get the sense of who had the upper hand in the situation,
Hmm.
and who had the divine right, I guess. And so there is that kind of bird symbolism there, which also is an American symbol too, with the eagle. Which also Julius Caesar, on his death, they released an eagle, and the eagle in Rome, it's not a little bird, but it's a bird, symbolized kind of the immortality of Rome.
Mm.
The other lines with the driving the spikes and blazing the rails, I feel that that's so American, going back to like John Henry and stuff. And actually, I
And you
found
wouldn't
that
be wearing a sharkskin suit with bow ties and buttons when you're doing that.
oh no, that would be the
Yeah.
boss man. That would be
Yeah.
the boss man.
Right.
And I think that's what he's talking about.
Right.
But who actually does the driving the spikes in? Who actually does it? That's the people working, and that's what a lot of these blues songs in the Alan Lomax books, are about. And the work songs and whatnot. And that actually, I think it comes from this line from this song. Hattie works on the Erie, and
Mm.
it's this section entitled Mike. It's this character Mike saying. this or singing this, and he says, "Damn be the president. My name's Mike. I got a hand in it. I drive in the spike." And then the next actual verse is, "A leveling up the roadbed ain't no fun, nor driving down the spikes in the boiling sun. Heat boils down and shakes along the blazing rails, hangs around your head until your mind nearly fails." So I think that's definitely kind of lifted from that. And it's a work song, from the early 1900s. And so I think it's really it's talking about these early Roman kings, but also kind of embedding the actual workers and the actual people who did. At the end with the fly away, it's try to save yourself, try to get out of this mess, basically.
Sort of a warning,
right?
Wow. Bob continues.
All the early Roman kings in the early morn, coming down the mountain, distributing the corn, speeding through the forest, racing down the track. You try to get away, they drag you back. Tomorrow is Friday, we'll see what it brings. Everybody's talking about the early Roman king.
I love the in that third line, you try to get away, they drag you back, referencing the bird previously. He gave the advice, but it's not going to hold. You can try to get away, but they're just going to get you back.
Yeah, and there's a lot of play in between the verses of references to other ones. Like there's foreshadowing with the mountain to the last verse with the mountain, You
don't always get that sort of direct connection from one verse to the next when it's not like a story that he's telling, like Tangled Up in Blue or something. But the imagery is clearly there. And again, coming down the mountain, distributing the corn, that does feel like the boss man. Right, like the kings are coming off of their high hill and their palace in the mountain, and they're the ones that distribute the corn, even though the people worked for it. Is that what you were getting at earlier? Is that?
Yeah. I mean that is very much a similar thing, and I think there's more things happening here too, which I think is amazing because it is. I never thought of that connection of going from night to morn. That's so lovely. I from all the times listening to this song, from all the things I've looked into it for, never thought of that.
Isn't that what's so great about Bob Dylan? Like you could listen to a song 100 times and then someone randomly says one thing. You're like, oh yeah, it happens to me like every day.
Oh my God. Well, and that's like why I really, have enjoyed Pod Dylan and the fact that you took on, this kind of role of the podcast. Like, it's just fun to hear. And it's like, who cares if anybody's fully right about anything?
Right. We're like explicitly not right. We don't know. When I asked you earlier, what does this mean, Peter?
Yeah, no, Bob's pointing his finger around and he's saying, hey, look here, look here, look here. Figure it out. Yeah. So going back to also the early morning line is like a classic kind of blues thing, like early in the morning blues, which I love. Call back to that. He's giving so many nods to like the early stuff that's inspired him too through this song. Like that's another layer to it. But with the coming down the mountain, distributing the corn, the mountain line foreshadows the last verse, which we'll talk about later. But the corn is, I think, really interesting here. Corn and grain have been specifically a long time American export. Corn doesn't, naturally exist, period. Native Americans actually, learned to propagate it. And so it only exists in America. And so we are in America here, like there's nowhere else that we're in. And also coming down the mountain, distributing the corn feels very much like bootlegging to me. Those bootleggers of the Prohibition era, especially with the feeding through the forest, racing down the track, right?
You mean like making like moonshine out of corn and stuff like that?
Exactly, yeah. In Appalachia, right? They'd go make the moonshine there, and then, they'd take it, to the cities, to, whoever, mob-run places, were importing this illegal booze. The speeding through the forest, racing down the track says that there's also NASCAR, right? NASCAR comes from this Prohibition, right?
I don't know much
No,
about.
so
I'm a big sports fan. I don't, but
I don't
only
know
if it has
any.
a ball. I don't know anything about
I know this
NASCAR.
because I know this only from my slight bit of prohibition knowledge.
Okay.
Because I've watched Ken Burns jazz probably, and like that might be tied in. But so basically, NASCAR started. They were driving moonshine down from the mountains, and they had to hop up their cars. So then they could take these country roads really fast and evade the cops if they got caught. And so that's actually, they kept doing that. And even afterwards, it became a thing to hop up your car and make it as fast as you could. So they developed NASCAR. And NASCAR was formed because it became so popular, even after like it became legal
Oh.
to, sell booze. Right? People still like driving fast. They
Oh, I
like
see.
hopping
So
up their
like
car.
customizing their cars and making them go
Right.
fast. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
And so it like that's a result of this prohibition and this illegal booze running by the mob is NASCAR.
Wow.
And
And of
so
course, Bob Dylan knows that.
and of course he builds it into two lines, and like this is something that I've thought about like since for so long, and it's just like how can he do that? Just like distill it like so well. And then also calls back later, to the Appalachian Mountains, as we'll get to in that last
Right,
verse.
right. So he says tomorrow is Friday. We'll see what it brings. Is in your opinion, is this a reference to the Sabbath beginning at sundown, or is this like a Catholic thing? Like what is happening on Friday?
So this is actually a reference I firmly, firmly believe to a Hemingway short story called "Today Is Friday."
Hmm.
And it's about these Roman soldiers who go into this wine cellars, establishment, this Jewish wine cellars establishment, and basically start talking about how they killed Jesus earlier, and how he was up on the cross. He was. They kind of they feel like they're American GIs. It's Hemingway, so he has that kind of war background. He's seen this before. It feels like GIs going into a pub and drinking and kind of treating the locals like shit. And
They're accusing the Jewish bartender or
no,
whatever.
no, no, they're talking about how they themselves.
Oh, they
Yeah,
as
sorry.
Romans were the ones
Yeah, these
that killed
Roman soldiers, they're
Jesus,
going out, they're
not
talking about the day's
Jews.
work. They're talking about the day's work. Basically, well, they had to, oh yeah, you see Jesus in there earlier, yeah, it was tough to see him up there, but he did a good job. They feel like kind of American GIs, kind of being, in a drunken stupor, and they end up not paying the Jewish wine merchant too.
Uh-huh.
But in this, kind of drunken stupor, and talking about how they, killed this guy Jesus earlier, and it's very casual. It's just this very kind of everyday feeling, and it's just business as usual for them, really.
Hmm.
And so I think it's Hemingway comparing, these GI kind of characters to these Roman soldiers, and then it's Dylan putting that in this song too.
Mm-hmm.
Saying how within these early Roman kings, this empire building stuff, how many Christs have we killed?
Mm-hmm.
How many times has this horrible act happens? And like we say, crucifixion was common then, and torture methods now are very common too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they're one of my favorite lines in the song, because when I was reading the Hemingway book and I saw that, I was like, oh, here we go.
Wow.
So,
Well, I mean, it has to be. I mean, that sound. If there's a Hemingway book almost literally called that refers to Roman soldiers, then for sure, I think we can assume you're correct here.
I do love, though, at the end of this verse, it's everybody's talking about the early Roman kings, because it puts you kind of in the present too. We have all this past stuff, but we're still talking about the present.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of going back to like, the interview he gave, right? He's still
mixing metaphors and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Right. Exactly. And, connecting these parallels, long-standing things that haven't changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go right into it.
They're peddlers and they're meddlers. They buy and they sell. They destroyed your city. They'll destroy you as well. They're lecherous and they're treacherous, hell-bent for leather, each of them bigger than all men put together. Sluggers and muggers, wearing fancy gold rings, all the women gone crazy for them early Roman kings.
I've seen women go crazy on that line in concert, by the way. And I'm sorry, but
That might be my wife.
lecherous, yeah, that'll be your wife. Lecherous and treacherous is one of the all-time great Bob Dylan rhymes for sure. Like that's an all-timer right there. That's brilliant.
Oh, it's so. I mean, this whole verse, it's like, and this whole song too. It's like the language is so perfect. I see, people say, the lyrics are good, they're fun, but they're really good. Just the pure language of them, like, the fly by night, just the definition of that. And, peddlers and meddlers, that's just such loaded language.
Right. And it's like, it's almost like sort of, maybe for Bob Dylan, it's just low hanging fruit. Maybe it's just like an easy rhyme for him, but I've never heard anyone else do that. So.
Well, and it fits so well. And also, I love how it's this peddlers and meddlers sound so old timey, right?
Yeah.
And then peddlers and the meddlers,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then he just describes what those types of people do. They buy and they sell.
They buy and they sell. And to me, that feels so Wall Street. It's just a clear, Wall Street.
Right. And like sort of putting those two things on the same level. They're essentially, right. Wall Street people are essentially peddlers and meddlers.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, the destroy your city, they'll destroy you as well line. I think that, it echoes into that. And then I feel like all of this it does build to this last verse, that's coming up because there is destroyed cities talked about later.
Mm-hmm. What does hell-bent for leather mean?
Oh, so there's a couple things. I've looked into this a little bit just to see what I could find. There is a film from the 60s, like a cowboy film called Hell-Bent for Leather. I couldn't find it. I watched it.
Maybe Bob will tweet about it tomorrow.
That would be sick. If you could also, I didn't have time before we started, but I saw the tweet. And I was gonna tweet back if you could send where we could find those blues tapes that Mickey was talking about, or the DVDs. I would love to see that. That would be great. I found a couple things. There's a Judas Priest song, Hell-Bent for Leather, which just, the fact that it's Judas Priest, and we've already kind of had these slight ideas of like, oh yeah, we're killing Christ here. I feel like that fits in. And also the lyrics to it are so dark. But there's also an album by Frankie Lane from 1961 from Columbia Records called Hell-Bent for Leather. And Frankie Lane wrote the theme for Rawhide. The famous TV show, starring Clint Eastwood. And, so he was a long time Columbia recorder, and he actually made popular the first recording of Lucky Old Son. Which is
Bob has done.
Right. And this is all from, my Wikipedia dive on what is Hell-Bent for Leather,
Sluggers and muggers wearing fancy gold rings. I've only heard of sluggers in as a baseball reference. Is there another? Is there something? Is someone who like punches people a slugger? Like what are sluggers and muggers? I know muggers are, but
it's just people who beat stuff up. Which it's like
tough guy.
Right, exactly. Which I love. It's the sluggers and muggers wearing fancy gold rings. It's like, where'd you get those rings? But I also the line before that each of them bigger than all men put together. I think that's a really important line to this verse. It kind of just reveals how powerful they are. Also, considering the mob thought, because that's still kind of in play. In America, we just have one mob boss. That's kind of the tradition here. Where in Sicily, it's more of a commission of bosses, too. So it's kind of this like, in America, the mob puts all their power into one person, where the Sicilian transfer it among others. So I think there's a little bit of callback there too.
I want to get into the music stuff for a second, but anything else on this particular stanza? Because we keep going back to something. I'm like, I don't want to miss anything. You've got so much good stuff.
I know.
Here.
Sorry, I'm trying to go lyric by lyric. as much as I can. Yeah, so I like the women going crazy. Again, that foreshadows the next verse. That leads us right into the next verse, I think. It's like it's built all these guys up as total, horrible people, but then all still the same. The women are going crazy for them, which, Mob Guy's famous for, womanizing. And again, in The Fugitive Kind and / Orpheus Descending / the Orpheus myth, it's all about, the woman and her fate ultimately. And getting stuck in this mess that men have created, basically. I think that's really the heart of it.
I know you said that the women going crazy goes right into the next verse, but I don't want to forget about the musicality sort of part of it. So the Muddy Waters riff is very clear. I mean, the da 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 da, like that is, Hoochie Coochie Man, Manish Boy, that is a familiar phrase that I think Bob expects us to hear that and feel comfortable with this song. Like, oh, do I know this song already? Like, we know that phrase, and obviously Bob reveres Muddy Waters. But as I was listening to many, many versions of this, including your own. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I want to ask you some questions about that. But
absolutely.
The riff that runs through the whole song. So I went on dylanchords.com, which is where I learned to play guitar. Thank you, Eolf. And you too?
Same. Yeah, absolutely. I learned how to play Bob songs, and, I added a lot of my own in there too, but yeah, absolutely.
I just, when I was learning how to play guitar, like just started at the beginning of Freewheelin' and just went down. So he says, the Muddy Waters riff that runs through the whole song starts just before the chord change indicated below, and he has the tabs for the riff. It is hinted at in the very beginning of the song in this form. Then he shows what the tablature is. But then he says something really interesting, which I didn't really understand. I was hoping maybe you could break it down for us as a professional musician. He says, it's really not a guitar song at all, but these are the notes anyway to be played as written here or some other place on the neck. And then he has the rest of the tablatures. And so I'm hearing Bob's organ very high in the mix. And that was that period of time. But what does he mean when he says it's not really a guitar song at all? It definitely is a guitar song. They're playing the Muddy Waters riff over and over again. What does that mean?
Yeah, and so, when I went to record my version of it, which, I normally, when I record a cover, I do not do it like it's done on the album. But with this one, I was just like, I was debating on how I was going to do it. And I was just like, I like this so much. I'm doing the podcast for it. I'm just going to do it kind of like the album version, and get it in that vein. I did some slight, very small twists. But so he says, it's not really a guitar song. I think because on the Tempest recording, the guitar isn't highlighted in it. And also, naturally, this is not an exact Muddy Waters riff.
Okay, so, say more. This
so
is good.
I can kind of show you on my guitar, but how Muddy Waters normally does it is it's normally more of a minor sound. Where
can you show us on your guitar?
I can, yes, I would absolutely love to. Yes. I have it here just for this reason. This is in G, this song. And so normally the Muddy Waters blues is something like, right? Okay. Yep. And this is the important chord that changes, right? That makes it a minor sound when Muddy Waters does it. And the reason why it happens on those blues recordings is because they're playing slide guitar in an open tuning. So you've got the slide on your finger and you can't, change anything. And when you play this chord, it's naturally gonna, even though it's technically a major chord because of how you're playing it, it's gonna sound dark and minor, right? And so actually what Bob does is instead of playing that chord on the recording, it goes...
Oh, play the two back to back.
Yeah, so here's the minor, the Muddy Waters. And then here is the Bob version.
It is a very subtle...
Super subtle difference.
You can hear it, and it does change it.
But it's actually pretty huge, I think, in the way it's played, because that's not naturally a sound you're going to get if you're trying to do lead riffs on the guitar. If you try to do that with slide, it would sound awkward if you played any more notes than just like the two I was playing. So it's a little harder to pull off, which is why he's got that accordion, which I love, or sorry, not the accordion, the organ grinding through it, accordion too. I love that it's the organ grinding through it too, which is such like, has its own history, being, in, black Southern poor churches, and, helping create so much music that we know now.
Right. It doesn't
And,
quite fit with a Muddy Waters blues song, but in this sort of Bob Dylan version of it, it's perfect.
right,
It
right.
makes sense there.
And it's so close, but it's just slightly off,
Mm-hmm.
And in my version, I decided, because I couldn't choose which to do, the minor kind of regular thing you would do, or Bob, and so I decided to do minor on the solo sections, which is normally what he does live. He kind of goes to that minor vibe, and then it just kind of goes back to like whatever he wants for the verses, basically whatever he's feeling that night. That's kind of what's happening there. But there's also, I'd love to talk about the accordion, because I think that's so important.
David Hidalgo, very important this period, Bob.
And it's, I love it. I love it on everything Bob does. Just give me the accordion. It's great. Are
you a Together Through Life fan?
Oh, absolutely. Great road. I mean, listening to that on the road is like great. It's like, it's meant to be a road trip album. I love it. The accordion, it's so haunting throughout this. And I feel like a couple things that I think about, first of all, the Muddy Waters feel of it, and normally having a harmonica play what the accordion is play. It's really taking over the harmonica part. So it's like hearing this accordion Italian ghost of Little Walter in Muddy Waters Blues Band.
Yes, right, because the accordion sort of subs for the harmonica, and very similar sound, right?
Yeah. It's playing the exact same riffs that it would play, and so it does feel, like the ghost of Little Walter is sitting in the room with Bob.
Yeah.
And I really like that, because it's, again, the past and present coming together. There's that, which also adds an Italian kind of vibe to it, which I really feel on Together Through Life. It's got this kind of Italian, maybe Cajun kind of influence. So it's like it's this cross-cultural thing happening in the music, and they're all becoming one in the music. It's that sound, of that accordion taking over the blues part, plus, this organ sound that is this very American, Southern sound. And they're all coming together to just hit this riff for, 5 minutes straight, over and over and over and over, and just, cycling through.
Do you play accordion?
A little bit. I have one. I was a fan of Weird Al when I was, 10.
Great.
And so I bought one, for $100 on eBay, and it turned out to be a nice one. And I got it fixed up, not a stupid 10-year-old investment. So I added on my recordings for texture, but the left-hand buttons, that it would take a lot of practice for me to get. That's a different world. I can handle the keyboard part. I would need some lessons on that one.
Is there anything else that jumps out to you musically that maybe Donnie Herron is doing, or Charlie, on this song that's, clearly the Muddy Waters riff, Bob's sort of unusual organ underneath, and then the accordion? What do you make of any of the other musicians? Is there anything sort of interesting happening there? It's okay if the answer is no.
I mean, with the recordings, it's all very serving the song, and there's no like really solo section or really
not in this period of time.
And maximum 4 bars, and so it's really just kind of filling that space and adding it in. What I will say is that live, especially during those solo breaks, which do get extended live, they really dig into that minor sound, and you'll often find Bob will hit a riff on piano, and Donnie would, just follow it totally and just, mimic it. And, I think Bob said something about, how it creates this kind of, big band kind of sound. And so there's a lot of that going on. It's still, it's not, live, they don't do this repetitive riff over and over, but there's, syncing up to create this kind of big full sound, and it just gets like so dark and gritty. Yeah. During those solo sections, it just like kind of blows you away, and then it's back and just kind of cuts you off,
Yeah, I remember especially on the Outlaw tour, Bob is kind of really hitting those keys very heavy, and Bob Britt or Doug Lancio, depending on who gets the solo that night, is like really hitting that note, really that sort of kind of really hard during that solo piece. And then, like you said, it's just like they stop on a dime and he goes back into the verses.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're really accentuating, the minor notes and the blue notes in that thing, and yeah, it really does cook. I was so happy to hear it again. I was so happy.
Yeah,
And it was so great. I love this song. Musically too, I love the way he sings it. Every time live, but also on the album, I think he's just got that purpose grasp. It's just like he just totally nails it.
Well, yeah. Well, when they like stop on a dime there, and Bob goes back into the lyrics, he continues.
I can dress up your wounds with a blood clotted rag. I'm afraid to make love to a bitch or a hag. If you see me coming and you're standing there, wave your handkerchief in the air. I ain't dead yet, my bell still rings. I keep my fingers crossed like the early Roman kings.
Before we get into the other stuff, we have to talk about I Ain't Dead Yet, My Bell Still Rings. I think one of the reasons Bob likes playing this live is because that's one of those moments where he interacts with the crowd, similar to the crowd loves that. I ain't dead yet. Everyone's like, woo, my bell still rings. Woo. Similar to when he used to do Spirit on the Water, and he'd say, you think I'm over the hill, and everyone would go, no. You think I'm past my prime? No. Or in
False Prophet.
Thank you. Yes, in False Prophet.
Yeah.
Right? When he's like, I'm first among equals, second to none. Yeah, and you can bury the rest. I think he likes that stuff. I think he's not gonna come out and say hello Chicago, but that when he can lyrically play with the audience, I love that.
Right. And well, like I don't know where it's from, but I've read he's said he writes songs that he can sing live now. And it's just so amazing because there's these songs that when you listen to them, on your own and within the context of the album, the other song is like, oh, this is all about this, or this is about this. And obviously, oh yeah, Bob ain't dead yet, etc. But then when he sings it live, it's like, oh, this is totally how he's singing it now, this is all about him, in a way. And I think that's the beauty of it. He kind of puts those things in there.
It's sort of like his music hair speech, sort of referencing other people. Like, why does he always have to take the beating for, his voice and all that stuff? He's like, I'm not dead yet. I'm still here. And my bell still rings, I think, is sort of a sexual reference, which goes with the rest of the verse.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then also goes with the Ding Dong Daddy in the next verse.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Well, let's go line by line here. So,
yeah.
Dress up your wounds with a blood clotted rag. What did you find?
I've always thought that was just an amazing line.
It's so gorgeous because it's so gross and nasty, and it's like you don't even want to think about that.
Anything is just rag. It's just it's like just totally throat. It's just like dark and gritty. And so it's just pure fun when you hear it. I do think though it seems kind of like a religious thing, and so I do think it does maybe have to do with a reference from the Bible. So there's something, and I'm not religious.
Okay.
Raised religious in any ways. I have my own whatever you'd call it that we don't need to get into. But I'm interested in everything. There's a line that we all have become like the unclean. All our righteous deeds are like a menstrual rag. All of us wither like a leaf. Our sins, like the wind, carry us away.
What's that from?
Isaiah 64:6, and that's the CEB version. He says it of, it's so dark, and, dress up your wounds with a blood-clotted rag. I'm going to put more impurity on top of you. I don't think it's like anti-women or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is clearly
obviously.
Next line, that's it's like the type of thing that, you could say doesn't age well, but he uses that kind of language in Philosophy of Modern Song. I think it's a style. It's
right.
Who am I to say? It's not nice to say those types of things about women.
Right.
I don't think he is he's intending it that way. I think he's creating a
No,
character within this song who speaks that way, but
exactly. And I would actually say that this song is very anti-patriarchy. It really is. And I think this line is even anti-patriarchy because it's two early Roman kings. If they're dressing up the wounds, right? Think of people who use religion, as this force of evil, or, giving their thoughts and prayers. God will fix this. God is on your side, etc. kind of deal. I think there's that layer in there too. But then, getting to the next line, I mean, I think it's a great line. I think the juxtaposition of make love and or a hag is just great.
That's classic
it's
Bob Dylan to take two things like that don't go together, and
right, exactly. I was trying to think about it, and I mean, obviously the word it's used so derogatorily against women, but also I think there's some callbacks to these early blues songs too, where you talk about sex more freely, and you use kind of foul language and stuff like that. There's a bit of that callback too, but the word hag kind of got me. I was like, what does it mean by hag? I mean, obviously it's a kind of same deal, but like so old timey. I was like, well, where does hag come from? And so I was thinking about it, and there are so many different hags throughout cultures that they're either become a forest mother or an evil witchy woman. And I'm so glad that you brought up philosophy of modern song, witchy woman, because I was going to bring that up too, because he has all this horrible language, but I think it's talking about society's view of women who are independent more than anything else. Especially in that he's saying this is how we see them. If he was saying that thing about men, we wouldn't necessarily think about it like that. And so the fact that we're like, whoa, Bob's saying all this crazy stuff about women, but he's also kind of highlighting them and saying, how Madame Lavraux, is this famous witchy woman and, has this huge impact, and I think he is really kind of highlighting their independence a bit. But there are also some famous hags too out there, like, Baba Yaga in the myth, and like Morgan in Irish mythology, kind of goddess of battle and stuff like that. And then I also saw Lilith from Bible, Old Testament stuff, which I thought, again, you might be able to, if you have.
I think it's Apocrypha. I think Lilith is from the Apocrypha, meaning it's not canon. It didn't make it in to the. Right. I think it's part of the New Testament, but I think Lilith is the Apocrypha.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm not familiar, so with those kind of things, searching for anything I can find. But
so it's like the book of Maccabees, the Lilith, some other books. They're what's called apocryphal. They didn't make the cut in the OG Bible or Torah, so they're included in the New Testament, which is both the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Apocrypha.
Okay, gotcha.
Sort of like the multiverse. It's not considered canon. So.
Right. Which, I feel like Dylan is kind of into,
Yes,
it's like, where the Jews and the Muslims and the Catholics all pray,
Yes. Yeah, he, mixing up the medicine. It's all good. Let's keep moving through the lyrics because we've got two more big stanzas to go through. I wanted to mention wave your handkerchief in the air. There's definitely a mirroring happening with the blood clotted rag, because I think when we think of waving a white flag, there is something sort of pure about it, that when the white flag goes up in the midst of a battle, it's because it's white. You see it, it's clean. And I think having that juxtaposed with the blood clotted rag it's sort of shocking to me anyway.
Oh no, absolutely. And that was, I think, my first point on this one. It is a very contrasting image. And I think multiple images come to my mind when I hear the wave your handkerchief in the air. First off, I think a celebrity or, somebody famous, politician, what have you, walking the red carpet, walking whatever, and people, waving at them. Obviously now, nowadays we don't really carry handkerchiefs on us, but think of back in the day, everybody would be doing that,
Sure.
But then, yes, there is, the in war waving the white handkerchief. And then there's also, in the Rome, the gladiators. You would wave your handkerchief to the gladiators in the ring to, signal your support. And I think they sometimes, started some games, but there was, a lot of that. And signs of affection too. Handkerchiefs have kind of been in that realm.
That's so
So
amazing. Like like what you said earlier about like something I said that you hadn't thought of before. Like I've heard the song, hundreds of times. And maybe because he says wave, I just immediately just went to like the white flag thing. But of course, in the context of making love and that the handkerchief in the air is like a girl waving at a soldier or something, or it never occurred to me till this moment. So,
right,
thank you,
right.
Peter.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, thank you, because honestly, like I've loved this song and I've thought about it for so long, and there's been some of these lines, and going through and preparing for this, I've come across some of the source material and being like, oh, okay, that's where that comes from. Like the previous line, if you see me coming, when you're standing there, um, it's from 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford. Oh, my soul to the company store song.
Okay.
Right. And so there's a line, if you see me coming, you better step aside. A lot of men didn't. A lot of men died. One fist of iron, the other is steel. If the right one won't get you, then the left one will. So it's that, you better, if you see me coming, you better step aside. I'll live from that. And that's again, Alan Lomax. And, that's, I've, got a couple Alan Lomax books, right here. And I've got bookmarks in them with just things underlined. That's a Bob reference right there.
It's amazing.
And it feels like the more, you're exposed to things, more you find.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Let's move on.
I can strip you of life, strip you of breath, ship you down to the house of death. One day you will ask for me, there'll be nobody else you'll wanna see. Hand down my fiddle, tune up my strings, gonna break it wide open like the early Roman king.
Every little part he has right before da-da-da-da early Roman kings is so good. It's the hook, so to speak, of and it could get boring. He could just say the same thing each time, but he's always got a different little thing there that's so interesting.
Right. Yeah, and like the end of the previous verse, the I ain't dead yet, it's just like he saves that right for second to last, to build it up to that. And then keeping the fingers crossed too, just the lucky bet kind of deal. But oh man, and then again, we'll get to the last verse in a minute, which I think is really one of the big ones in this one, but that ends in such a great way too.
He's such a grim reaper here. I'll strip you of life, strip you of breath. It's so haunting. He's like a dementor,
A couple of things here. This is taken from the Odyssey translation, when Odysseus and the Cyclops Patholomus have their interaction, and it's basically Odysseus's hubris after he escapes, and he is the one who actually gets cursed after that. So there's that kind of thing there going on, but it's also just this really dark and gritty line, and I think it just echoes a lot of what the other stuff is saying of like how powerful these Roman kings are too.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's get into it. You've been teasing it since the beginning of this podcast. The last line.
I was up on Black Mountain the day Detroit fell. They killed them all off and they sent them to hell. Ding dong daddy, you're coming up short. I'm gonna put you on trial in a Sicilian court. I've had my fun, I've had my flings. I'm gonna shake them on down like the early Roman king.
All right, go for it, Peter. Let me have it.
All right, so there's so much here, and I have so many thoughts on it. I've always thought I was up on Black Mountain was kind of a reference to, money, being in the red and being the black. Just like, on, is that Dignity? Yeah, on Dignity. And so that has always kind of been my thought, especially the day Detroit fell. Somebody has made money off of people losing.
Is that a specific reference to something? I mean, to bring Detroit into, or the way he says it, Detroit, to bring Detroit into this when we're sort of in this not unspecific period of time and country. Now we're in Detroit. Like, what is he referencing? Is there something specific that he's referencing of the day Detroit fell?
Yeah, I mean, we ain't in Rome anymore, you know. We are in America, and I think this really seals the deal that this is about American imperialism in a way, and you know, within our country and you know abroad. There have been many things that have happened in Detroit. You know, it's a famous town. I mean, created Motown, soul. I mean, a huge Black American history there. But in my view, I think there's 3 periods, you know, Dylan could be talking about, and probably all at the same time, honestly. You know, there's the siege of Detroit, which happened. The British, you know, took Detroit, and basically the commander, William Hull, the general, knew he was outnumbered and surrendered to save lives. So
you mean during the American Revolution?
I think it was 1812.
Oh, later. Okay.
Yeah. I think it was later. That could be it, but nobody actually really was killed off. You know, somebody surrendered to spare lives. And so the next thought is, you know, the Detroit riots of the 60s, too. There was so much oppression to Black Americans just systematically that, you know, things just turned awful. You know, I think that could be considered a day, you know, or, you know, the period when it fell. And also, you know, the fall of the auto industry, you know, right after basically this album came out too. But I think a key thing that is overlooked is the Black Mountain bit. And I didn't, you know, I said that Red and the Black thing, but actually I just happened upon watching, you know, a documentary about Black Mountain in Appalachia. And so there's a town in Lynch, Kentucky that was one of the richest coal mining towns. And basically U.S. Steel bought acres of the mountain, you know, hundreds of acres of the land to mine after World War I, you know, for coal. And, you know, they got a huge boom in World War II for it. There were all these mine workers in these horrible conditions. You know, it wreaked havoc on the environment. People tried to unionize, you know, rumor was people were killed. All these things were brought upon these people, you know, trying to make a living, basically. And so basically, you know, the owners won, you know, in the end. And then eventually all those jobs left and they went to Detroit. And actually my wife's grandpa was his dad. They're from Tennessee, and his dad is from Jellicoe, Tennessee. You know, it's like 90 miles from Black Mountain coal mining area. His dad, you know, worked in the coal mines in the, you know, early 1900s, you know, was forced into the drink and stuff, and all of that. But, you know, he, by the time of the 60s, went to Detroit for the jobs. And then he retired and came back, and the towns were dead.
Wow.
Just totally decimated. And, you know, we'd go back and visit him before he passed away, and it was just depressing to see what his downtown might have been. And I really think that is distilled into these 2 lines. And there's no way that, you know, I mean, Dylan's been through that territory. I'm sure he knows about Black Mountain. He knows about coal mining. You know, he said that, you know, North Country Blues was about Virginia coal mines. You know? Right. He knows about Tennessee coal mining. He knows about Black Mountain, I'm sure. And, you know, as recently as 1997.
Episode of Songs of Experience.
Right? Exactly. That's what made me think about it too, you know, and kind of put these dots together. It's like, oh, this is the Black Mountain, you know. It comes to kind of putting these prophets over people, I think. And then the ding dong daddy, you're coming up short. Such a funny line. It's taken from Ding Dong Daddy from Doomis.
Okay.
I only know this song because I heard it like on a comedy show, a Nathan Fielder show a couple of years ago, like in a sketch. And I was like, what is this? But, you know, stuck in my head. And then I came back and listened to the song. I was like, oh, it's talking about that. But Doomis, Texas is an oil town. And basically this guy was paid to write a town for Doomis, and it became kind of a hit on the radio. Ding Dong Daddy from Doomis.
Okay. And you think it's that there's some play with the My Bell Still Rings?
Well, yeah, I think just the idea of it. It's like you're a ding dong daddy, you know, you're doing stuff, right? You're kind of the happening guy, you know, your bell's still ringing, right? But then Bob says you're coming up short. You know, you're
all talk,
right? You're all talk. You're the suave lady killer, but you know, you ain't gonna make the cut here. Which then with the next line, "Gonna put you on trial in a Sicilian court." That really seals the deal of Bob kind of condemning all these people doing all this wrong. Because there was a huge trial in the, I think, early 90s. I forgot the exact year, but basically the only time the Sicilian mafia has ever been put on trial. And there were 200 something arrests. Obviously, people still got away, but it was a huge hit.
In the U.S. or in
Sicily? In
Sicily.
Sicily. Okay. And so that's why it's a Sicilian court, gonna put him on trial in a Sicilian court. And so I think, he's saying, all right, you suave money makers, you guys who have been, taking all the power you have, comes from the actual working people of America. I want to put you on trial. And I'm going to do that embedded in this song. Bob's coming knocking. And it is a mafioso kind of situation. Like, ding dong daddy, I'm coming for, I'm coming for my cut here. It really goes all back to that.
But then he gets sort of meta by saying, I've had my fun, I've had my flings, that he's both a part of the song, but also it's kind of a wrap up of the whole song. Like, I've had my fun taking you all down throughout this song, right? Like,
exactly.
He's sort of saying two different things there.
It's the same thing as I'm glad I fought. I only wish we won kind of deal. To me, it's very, very similar. But yeah, it is and there is so many. That layer of. It's, who's talking throughout the song,
Right.
You can go line by line. It's like, who's talking? Is the Roman King? Is it Bob? Is it somebody else? And I think there is definitely that aspect of it's Bob talking, especially when you think about that. There's a lot of homage to the old blues guys too with that too. But he's also saying, like, I've taken from the cup, I've taken my sip. I'm passing it along. I'm trying to give it to you. And the I've had my fun, I've had my flings actually does come from a song by Jesse Price and his blues band from 1946 called "You Can't Take It With You," which I found, I think, on Hard Rain and Slow Trains. I think that they played that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was great. You can't take it with you. It's early Roman Kings. It's all about these horrible, evil people who control our world. The conductors of our train ride through hell.
When he's saying gonna shake them all down, like the early Roman Kings, is he saying he's going to shake down the early Roman kings, like everyone he's taken down in this? Or is it he's going to shake someone else down like the early Roman kings would do?
Well, and there's so much of that through this whole song, too. It's like, you could take all the lines this way, which is so great. Is Bob, like, if Bob said this, what would this mean? Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about that. I think, obviously, the shakedown being what the early Roman Kings does, and, being what he wants to do, he wants to put them on trial, shake them down. But then is it in false prophet? When you're smiling, it's my smile, something's got to give,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to shake down, but also, like, I've heard the idea, Bob's not a false prophet, but also not a false prophet in a,
profits
monetarily,
like money.
Right,
yeah.
right, exactly. He's working, he's a working man. But it's also, he's sold his stuff, he's working with them. So I don't really know. I feel like it's a little bit of all the above there,
Peter, this is your last chance. Is there anything else you want to say about early Roman kings?
Yeah, I mean, I have too much to say.
One more thing. You can say one more thing.
I feel like it encompasses this whole thing on Tempest that is the religious album that wasn't. And I think that Rough and Rowdy Ways is the religious album that is. And this was the last big storm before the cool breeze. Mm-hmm. And I think that especially, he's played it so many times. This is kind of the heart of Tempest, I think.
Mm-hmm. Track 7, I believe, right? Yeah, track 7.
Okay. Wow.
It's right in between. It's right in between Scarlet Town and Tin Angel. I mean, this is a quietly, and we talked about this. I talked about this with Michael in the first episode. This is a quietly amazing album. Like, every single song has such, so many merits, and this is kind of nestled in there right after. Scarlet Town's one of the highlights of this album, in my opinion, and it's kind of, and that's such a soft, quiet album, and to come up with this kind of brings you up before you head towards the end into eventually Roll on John. So yeah,
Yeah.
Peter, where can folks find you if they want to talk about Bob Dylan? Is there anything you want to plug? Like I said, you're an amazing musician, and we're gonna share out your version of early Roman Kings.
Again, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so happy that you're doing this. I love to hear people talk about Bob, and like you said, it's great to hear all these different perspectives, and you learn something new all the time. But yeah, I'm a Minneapolis-based musician. I'm gonna have a couple new singles coming out pretty soon. Made in America with a virtual B-side called Number 4209. Some home recordings I've done recently that I'm getting mixed. But by the time this comes out, I'll be in the studio again with some.
Do you play all the instruments on your recordings?
Yeah, so on the early Roman Kings, I played all the instruments. On my stuff, I got another drummer in there.
Okay.
I'm really not a drummer. I can do the rest, but I'll have it up on Spotify. You can search Peter Hayward, and I'll be there. You can find me on Bandcamp. Feel free to find me on Twitter, too.
It's Peter_Hayward, HAYWARD,
Oh, God, the underscore.
and then another underscore.
Oh, God, the underscores. What have I done to myself? But yeah, hit me up. I teach lessons. I'm a multi-instrumentalist, play live and in the studio. So if anyone ever wants, to learn anything or some help on recordings, give me a shout.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Henry. I really appreciate it, too.
Take care. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Please look for the next episode on the 15th day of the month in all of your podcast feeds. Give us a follow on Twitter @SongsOfBob. If you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment and give us a rating and review. For a video version of this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@songsofbobdylan. You can email us at songsofbobdylan@gmail.com. Thank you to my friend and mentor, Rob Kelly, for designing our fabulous logo, and to my mandolin teacher, Mark Mitchell, from the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago, for teaching me how to play the intro and the outro. If you would like to help support the cost of hosting my podcasts, go to patreon.com/gonzo3249. For $5, I'll show my gratitude by giving you a shout out on the show of your choice. For $10, I'll also send you a surprise piece of vintage Bob Dylan merch. So big thank you to Rob Kelly, Roberta Rakov, Matt Simonson, and Christopher Vani. Truly, I love you all. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.
The early Roman kings in their sharkskin suits, bow ties and buttons, high top boots, driving the spikes in, blazing the rails, nailed in their coffins, top hats and tails. Fly away, little bird, fly away, flap your wings. Fly by night like the early Roman king. Oh, the early Roman king in the early morn, coming down the mountain, distributing the corn, speeding through the forest, racing down the track. You try to get away, they drag you back. Tomorrow is Friday, we'll see what it brings. Everybody's talking about the early Roman king. They're peddlers and they're meddlers, they buy and they sell. They destroyed your city, they'll destroy you as well. They're lecherous and they're treacherous, hell-bent for leather. Each each of them bigger than all men put together. Sluggers and muggers, wearing fancy gold rings. All the women gone crazy for them early Roman kings. I can dress up your wounds with a blood-clotted rag. I'm afraid to make love to a bitch or a hag. If you see me coming and you're standing there, wave your handkerchief in the air. I ain't dead yet, my bell still rings. I keep my fingers crossed like the early Roman kings. Strip you of life, strip you of breath, ship you down to the house of death. One day you will ask for me, there'll be nobody else you'll want to see. Hand down my fiddle, tune up my strings, break it wide open like the early Roman kings. I was up on Black Mountain the day Detroit fell. They killed them all off and they sent them to hell. Ding dong daddy, you're coming up short. I'm gonna put you on trial in a Sicilian court. I've had my fun,